friends, welcome back to my channel. I am Cher. I am so excited about today's episode. It's going to be very different from what you're used to here. I know you're used to seeing me in my beauty corner sharing all the beauty stuff. We're going to be coming from a different angle. I love to do travel vlogs because I love sharing all the beauty in this world too. So still beauty here on the channel, just in a different way. So if you've been around here for a while, you'll know that I'm absolutely obsessed with Scotland, and I've been talking about this dream trip of mine to Scotland for weeks and months and years now, and it is only 2 weeks away. I cannot believe it. So I brought you a prep video earlier, mentioned how I wanted to do a video kind of sharing more along the lines of why I'm obsessed with Scotland, things I've learned on the history of Scotland, as well as my ancestry research. I wanted to share a lot of my findings and make this kind of like an introduction to our Scotland trip, sharing where all we're going to be visiting and why a lot of those places are very significant to me, some of the history behind those places, and kind of prep you guys for the trip because I am going to be bringing you along. You better believe it. Also going to be doing some packing videos for you guys. So if that interests you, make sure to pop that subscribe. You're going to be seeing a lot of Scotland, as well as continued beauty on my channel and other travel vlogs as well, and you don't want to miss it. So let's dig in and get started. First, I'm going to show you kind of on the map here what we are doing. I'm going with a group of girls. So we're going to be flying into Edinburgh. Okay, the locals say Edinburgh, but I am a very southern girl, and so it comes out all wrong. I'm going to attempt it, but Edinburgh. We're going to be flying into Edinburgh, and we're going to, from there, start making our way to the west. And we're going to head around Argyll area, and I got to get all the pronunciations right too, guys. I've read this stuff so much, but I never remember how to pronounce it. So we're going to be making our way through the Argyll area, which is my homelands of my clan. This is like the area for sure I'm the most interested in of all. So much history there I will share with you. And we're going to continue kind of heading our way up more north. We're going to ride the Jacobite train, also known as the Harry Potter train. We are going to be maneuvering over to Isle of Skye. So exciting. We're going to make our way back over towards Fort William, and we'll be hitting, of course, Culloden and the Stones, Loch Ness, definitely, making our way to Inverness, and then back south and towards the east, back towards Edinburgh, where we'll hopefully hit up some more Outlander sites, including Lollybrook, which is Midhope Castle. A few others that, you know, we're hoping to fit in, but we're not completely sure. That's kind of our general plan for the trip. Okay, so let's start talking a little bit about the general history of Scotland, if you're not familiar, and then I'm going to kind of bring it alive with spots we're going to. Way before Scotland was ever united and what people think of as Scotland, you had a lot of different little tribes of people. You had the Picts, or kind of named that by the Romans. I mean, we're going back to like 1st century here, guys, before Christ, too. And, you know, we're going to go back to those days, way back. And so you had the Picts running around, you had the Brits, you had the Angles, a lot of different tribes of people. And that's kind of what was making up the Scottish lands at that time. Then you did have the Gaelic tribe. The Gaelic were coming around, you know, as well, starting to form a lot more towards the west of Scotland and towards Wales in that area. And then some of these were also known as the Scots or Scotty. And so I guess where Scottish was born from that name. So by the 6th century, the Gaelic tribes had started to form their own kingdom in Scotland. It was called the Dal Riata. I have no idea if they say that right. By the 8th century, then, you also started getting the Viking invasions. So lots of different people and forces and tribes and wars and battles. So eventually, the Picts and the Gauls finally kind of united in order to fight the Viking forces. So your very first tribal leader of this united front of the Picts and the Scot was King Alpin, recorded around 830s and like 830s, 840s, something along in those lines. And he was kind of known to be the very first king, so to speak, of this united Scotland, if you call it Scotland. It wasn't called Scotland yet. It's this kingdom of Diarrhea. He kind of ruled along the lands of the Macintyre and like Northern Ireland. And so if you don't know, so showing you on the map where Macintyre is, still kind of close around where my Argyll area lands lie. Then eventually his son was Kenneth the first king, and then he ruled what really became known as the first kingdom of Scotland, and he was known as the King of Alba. And so from that line came the Alpine line, which were kind of like the first string of Scottish kings, and what was starting to become a monarchy for this united little kingdom of Scotland. And you can actually visit the hill fort around the Argyll area where a lot of these kings were inaugurated and kind of had their ceremonies for, you know, passing down that line. And so your very first beginnings of what we know of Scotland were around this Argyll area. Very exciting. And so over time, you know, these Alpine kings kind of ruled in the area, but you had your last king who died with no successor, King Malcolm II, and then he ended up having a granddaughter who was supposed to be the heir, but she died as well. So this is when King Edward from England came along and started to make his presence known and start to take advantage and exploit, you know, these fights in the succession. And that's when he stepped in, and we started to know a lot of this history through our lovely Braveheart movie. Mel Gibson portrays all of this for us very well. And this is where the Wars of Independence start coming in around the 1200s. And from there, I think a lot of people know the Scottish history there, but many don't know as much from these beginning stages. So if you want a good feel for what it was like around, you know, 8th century, and all of these different tribes and who all you got going on in the whole overall, like, Great Britain, an awesome show to watch is called The Last Kingdom. I am obsessed, and it really depicts, it takes you more through England than it does Scotland. But they do talk about some of the fighting with the Scots as well, because they're right along the Northumbrian border that borders to Scotland too. And so you really get a good feel for the Saxons fighting with the Danes, fighting with the Mercians, the Britons a little bit are discussed, Angles, you know, you've got all these different tribes. And it kind of chronicles you through King Alfred, who had a vision to unite all of England. And it was kind of, it began with his vision to what we see as modern day England now. So very fascinating to see all of this play together, and research in Scottish history too, how all the pieces parts fit together. So that's the overall general history of the beginnings of Scotland, the early days. Now let's kind of talk about how the clans were formed a little bit, and specifically my clan, and still kind of rising out of this early history of the early Celts and that whole Argyll western region. Okay, so around the 12th century, we have this lord known as Somerled, and I don't know if I'm saying his name right or not, but he's a very important guy. And what's fascinating is there's a lot of DNA research out there. If you've ever done the ancestry tests and you have ties to Great Britain, you are most likely going to have ties to this guy. You're going to show traces back to him in your blood, and I have, because he's like the father of all of these clans and, a lot of the nations. And I think they say some 500,000 or so of us still have traces of him in us. So this guy kind of started it all, Somerled. He was a Norse Celtic guy, and he conquered a lot of lands in this Argyll, like Western Isles region. And I don't know if he was in love with, or he just wanted the lands, or what, probably political ambition, but he wanted to marry a Viking lord's daughter. I'm assuming this Viking lord did not allow him to, But he wanted that girl. He wanted the princess of this Viking guy. Now, the Viking guy's name was Olaf, like the snowman. So, Somerled's nephew devised a plan to hop into Olaf's boat, his galley, as they called it, and went and sabotaged the boat, poked a bunch of holes in it, and plugged it up with wax to hold it, and then got onto the boat with Olaf and his crew. And while they're out in the middle of the ocean, kind of like deteriorated the wax so that the boat was about to sink. And basically, as it was about to sink, he had gotten on board with a bunch of boat corks, wooden corks he'd made. And he told Olaf, "I will save your life on one condition, that you allow my uncle to marry your daughter." And so with that condition, he plugged up the holes with his wooden corks, saved Olaf's life and the crew. And so Somerled was able to marry the Viking princess. From there, since he married this Viking princess, he was able to acquire a lot more lands in the area, and he became known as the Lord of the Isles. And he was kind of a great warrior, dominated the whole area, had many, many children, and these children and his descendants all became several of the clans that we know of in Scotland now. The MacDonalds, the McDougals, the McAllisters all come from this guy, Somerled. And coincidentally, this nephew that was a little trickster here, that saved the day and allowed for all of this, that guy, he's my ancestor. He is our father and chief of our McIntyre clan. So we're kind of like cousins to the MacDonalds, us McIntyres. And so through his children, that nephew guy, he basically became known as a wright or a carpenter because of plugging the holes. And that's what the meaning of the name McIntyre is wrights or carpenters, based on the nephew, the trickster nephew. So my McIntyres came from that nephew. So my McIntyre clan, basically his descendants went on for a time, and eventually they went looking for land of their own. And it is through legend that apparently a spirit told them and warned them that they should only stop wherever the white cow that was in their cattle coming with them, wherever the white cow laid down is where they should stop. So apparently the white cow must have landed around the Glen No area near Glen Etif, and that is the homeland of my McIntyre clan. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a moment. And meanwhile, Somerled went on to become a great Celtic hero. He actually fought and conquered a lot of Viking foes in the area. However, he was actually kind of seen as a rival to the Scottish kings, to the Alpine line. There wasn't complete unity, around the area at that time. And he actually ended up dying in battle against King Malcolm IV, who was trying to expand into his lands. And that was in 1164. And so from there, his lands were actually split up between his children that went on to produce what we know of as some of these tribes in Scotland. You had his son Reginald, who the clans Donald, MacDonald, McRoy, and McAllister kind of derived from. He also had his son Dugald, who the clan McDougall comes from. And I think Mac is maybe sons of, so you're seeing like the sons of Dougal, the sons of Donald. He also had a daughter who was an actual priestess over in Iona. Some of that Celtic Catholicism was important to him, and had some traditional religious views there too. So as we see, his daughter actually had a hold over in the Iona area. So even though these early MacDonalds were kind of a little bit rivals with the Alpine Scottish line, eventually they found great favor with the monarchy because they were a huge aid to Robert the Bruce. It actually helped him in securing, in the Wars of Independence. And so the MacDonalds actually kind of were huge and were like at the right hand of the army for the monarchy once Robert the Bruce had victory after the Battle of Bannockburn. So that is such a fascinating look at kind of the establishment of the clans. And I just love how my McIntyre clan was there from the start and involved in all of this. How all of this is very important to me and the trip and how places we're going to be visiting. Our first stop after Edinburgh, which we'll talk about the history of Edinburgh too shortly, but we're going to be hitting that kind of Argyll and Western Isles area where Somerled and his crew, you know, were reigning, and some of these earlier kings were in this area. We're going to be visiting close to my homeland. I'm not able to get straight into Glen No and Glen Etive where my McIntyres landed because it is a forsaken place now, and it's mostly, you got to really hike there and all, and we don't have enough time to really hike back there. But we will be visiting Castle Kilchurn, which is, this was actually a Clan Campbell castle. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but it's going to be the closest castle to my McIntyre lands. It actually bordered along the southern border of my lands. So that's going to be probably my number one most exciting stop on this whole trip, is seeing Castle Kilchurn. And this is a ruin now. And it's actually closed at the moment, but just seeing it from afar is going to be the most exciting thing in the world to me. And it's along the Loch Ness, which was an area of my McIntyres all along this river. And there was actually a little city called Clodish, I think it is, something along those lines, where a lot of our carpenters were as well. So this whole loch is very significant for me. We're also hoping to visit Castle Itinerary, which is another Clan Campbell castle, and it is a lot more modern. It wasn't there like way back at the time. And we're hoping to visit Oban, which is a city now. It's very much like a fishing city, and it wasn't established till later, like 1800s, I think, also. So it wasn't there back in this time, but just this whole general area. I guess Oban's, though, like the closest city in this Argyll area to these lands, and a lot of fun things to see and do there in the history, and just a quaint little like fishing village. So a little bit deeper dive into my McIntyre clan so that I can bring these lands alive even more and illustrate the rivalry with the Campbells and what that means to us McIntyres. A little ancestry notebook, and I have like my binders, you know, my dividers are divided up by like which side of the family. And then I have these little books on the McIntyre clan and the MacDonald clan, because those were probably the most significant for me and in history. The MacDonalds and the Campbells were actually rivals. They were always bickering and major rival clans. And the McIntyres were kind of stuck between them. So the McIntyres were kind of family to MacDonald's. And, you know, we went way back because we helped out, you know, in the beginning with Somerled. But over time, we ended up being tenants on the Campbells' land. So all of our McIntyre land were actually belonging to the Campbells. We settled there at first freely and fought for it by the sword, but eventually we ended up falling into their hands as tenants, and we had to actually owe them to live there. But we still had a lot of feuds with them. So the lands where, you know, the McIntyres were, it kind of passed over the years. I think it was at first the McDougalls, and then over time went to the Stewarts, and then over time went to the Campbells. For a long time, the McIntyres had actually been foresters for them, for the Lord of Lorne. Well, the Lord of Lorne was, you know, basically the title of that area. And so the McIntyres kind of served as the foresters for the area. But as the clans kind of passed down, you know, over time, it ended up being the Campbells that were Lord of Lorne. And so the McIntyres ended up kind of having to be beholden to the Campbells. So the Campbells had a major power play in the area. And way later down in the line, as I mentioned, they had a major rivalry with the MacDonalds. A long time later, in 1692, they ended up having a surprise massacre and butchered a group of the MacDonalds in the massacre of Glencoe, another place we're going to be visiting in the area. Beautiful valley, but lots of sad history there. And this is a whole book that I have on that massacre. And it was basically the MacDonalds opened up their homes, allowed for hospitality for a group of the Campbells to come and, negotiate, discuss some things. And instead of negotiating while they were in their homes, they ended up butchering and massacring them. Interestingly enough, a few of the escapees that actually did get out of there ended up running to McIntyre lands. And so there were some McIntyres that helped those victims out. Eventually in 1806, unfortunately, my McIntyres just got to the point where they could no longer pay the rent. And so they had to actually relinquish their lands. And the last of the McIntyres ended up immigrating to America. So that's kind of the story of my McIntyres. And along the way, there was a lot of contention with the Campbells. So Culloden Castle that I have discussed and where we're going to go visit, and the significance to my McIntyre family in the 1400s, was built by and for Sir Colin Campbell, the first Lord of Glenarchy, that Glenarchy area there. So my ancestor, they say John the First, but in translation, it also is Ian Booty, something along those lines, who was kind of the very first record, chief of our McIntyre clan in the Glencoe area. And then all of his descendants go from him. So my guy, John, he had kind of supposedly been like a ringleader or been a little bit of a part of some killing or murder of the Campbells, Lord's foster brother or something along those lines. So my guy was still kind of blamed as being part of that coup, part of that. So since they supposedly owed them, he ended up owing Colin Campbell, the guy who built the Culloden Castle. I get maybe it was in exchange for not hanging him. I don't know. But he basically was kind of blackmailed into, you need to pay me allegiance now. So he was strong-armed into paying allegiance to Colin Campbell of Glenarchy and the Glenarchy Campbells. And that's kind of, it was strained relations over time, this kind of strained allegiance that the McIntyres had to owe and pay to the Campbells. Many times over the years, my McIntyres got it. They were kind of, they went rogue a lot. They were kind of rebellious. That's probably where I got my spirit from, my fighting spirit. And they would, they'd do a few things with the cattle that irked the Campbells. There were some feuds between them at times. And so many times the Campbells would require certain McIntyres to marry one of their daughters and marry and keep the Campbell tribe going through the McIntyres in exchange for being able to still live on the lands. So not only were they extorted from rent, they also got extorted into marriage with daughters and, So that's how our intermarriages happened with the Campbells. We have some Campbells that we married. We had McDonalds that we married. So strained relationships with the Campbell lands here. So this is all of importance to me with Culloden Castle. I'm so excited to see it. You also have the Itinerary Castle that the Campbells close by reigned over as well. So, and then around 1689, I think the Culloden Castle was actually kind of converted into a garrison around the Jacobite risings. And then by the end of the 1700s, the castle was actually abandoned. So a few things that are of significance about the Itinerary Castle. This is this fairy tale castle. You'll see a lot of people photograph there, but it's a little more modern. It was actually built more in the Gothic revival style. There was a foundation that was there before, but then they kind of revived it and built on that foundation later on in 1746. So it's a little older, newer castle. It's actually appeared in some movies and shows like Downton Abbey, and James V even stayed there. And so it's currently actually an active working castle and a museum. You can go visit. The current Duke and Duchess of Argyll which is Clan Campbell, still reside over it. And so it's been featured. I've watched a documentary on it. So I'm excited to go visit this one too, because I've watched a lot on this castle as well. And then we'll be visiting the Glencoe area as well while we're there. So we'll be able to see where the massacre took place. I have really tried to envision this area a lot, and like the blood trails, and so this is going to be fascinating. We're being very ambitious on this day when we cover a lot of this ground in the Argyll area, but this is like my favorite day of all because this is my history here. Let's chat about Outlander filming sites. So for those of you who have seen Outlander, some of the sites where we're going to go that they filmed from, there's of course Culloden, the battlefield. And so what Culloden was a battle between the Scottish and Scotland and England. Unfortunately, England won. So you had the Jacobite rising in around 1745, which was basically, the Jacobites were, a lot of the Scottish clans that were basically kind of revolting against the English, and they unfortunately lost, and they had the Battle of Culloden where they faced the English army, and were defeated. And this was kind of the end of Scottish culture as we know it, with the clans and a lot of their customs. They were very much dominated by England. A lot of their customs they had to kind of hide, and it was like the Underground Railroad almost. They could be punished for some of the things, their tartans and things like that. So it was like very big deal. So we're going to be visiting Culloden, the battlefield. You have a lot of cairns set up. There's a museum. And of course, Culloden is huge. There's, the whole battle is filmed there in Outlander. We also have Midhope Castle, which is Lallybroke, in the fictional Lallybroke in the Outlander series, which definitely going to be visiting there. So excited about it. And you have a lot of other filming sites. I'm hoping to see where she comes back and finds Jamie at the print shop in Edinburgh while I'm in Edinburgh. A few different sites that we see in Outlander we're definitely going to be seeing. I really want to visit Doune Castle as well, which is in Outlander. It's also the castle in Game of Thrones, as well as Monty Python, I believe. So I'm dying to go to that one, but that's going to be one of those we have to play by ear and see if we're going to be able to get around to it. And I have this fun book I'll link for you that just shows you a lot of the scenes, like where to go find some of these sceneries and filming locations in Outlander. So let's talk about Edinburgh. This is where we'll be spending a good bit of time, both at the beginning of the trip and at the end of the trip. Lots of history here. It has been the capital since 1437. It's also where the Scottish Parliament resides. So Edinburgh Castle is definitely like the #1 priority on my list of things to visit there, but lots of things to do in Edinburgh and places that I want to see, and it's just going to have to be playing it by ear time-wise. So the castle was actually built on an extinct volcano, which I didn't really realize that before, kind of known as Castle Rock. And I'm almost wondering if that's what Game of Thrones castle is named after, is Castle Rock, perhaps? So it was kind of established around the 12th century, King David I. It was one of his first royal little counties or burgs or whatever they call that. He did set up a fortress up where the castle is, up on Castle Rock, kind of guarding it. But even before then, some of the earliest settlements and archaeological digs and stuff found there date back to even like the Romans and the Iron Age. And some of those are found in the Cremond area, if I'm saying that right. Even some over around Arthur's Seat, I'll talk about in a minute. Even Castle Rock area. So settlements go back way before that, but I guess established as like part of Scotland would be kind of back to around the 12th century. Have the St. Giles Cathedral, or Giles, and this was like there was the earliest church there kind of evolved and became St. Giles. That earliest church was there as early as 854. So that is definitely one highlight on my trip too. I'd love to see that cathedral. We also have St. Margaret's Chapel, which is the oldest surviving building in Edinburgh. And this goes back to the 12th century. Also, there's some discrepancy as who built it, but I think they have discovered that it was King David who built it in his mother's memory. So a lot of history in the castle. This is where Queen Mary of Guise, I never say everything right. She actually died there in 1560. And this is also where Queen Mary of Scots, the notorious Queen Mary of Scots, probably one of the most popular figures in Scottish history, gave birth to her son, King James the Sixth. Lots of history inside those walls, lots of fights between especially Scotland and England. It fell into England's hands many, many times and went kind of back and forth. And so there's a lot to see inside, like the crown of jewels are in there. Basically, the jewels that King James V wore in his crown, and then they were actually hidden, taken from there, I think I guess they were hiding them from Oliver Cromwell, and then they were brought back eventually, so you can see those there. Also see the Stone of Destiny, which was a stone that was used, I guess, with the inauguration of a lot of the earlier Scottish kings. But King Edward actually took it, so it was actually passed down through a lot of England, but now it resides with Scotland. So fascinating. That would be so fascinating to see. I think that I saw that the birthing room where Queen Mary gave birth to King James is actually closed. You can't see that. Bummer, because I would die to see it, but I think you can see the great dining hall. You can also visit the Half Moon Battery, and this battery was actually built around the ruins of King David's Tower, 1367, but it basically came down in one of the sieges. And so, but this battery is built around those actual ruins. So definitely will be touring the castle. No doubt, I've already got the tickets. That's going to be a huge, huge thing we do. And hopefully St. Giles Cathedral, hopefully visiting the print shop for Outlander. Really would like to visit Greyfriars Kirkland. This is what inspired some of the names in the Harry Potter books, visiting Tom Riddle's grave. Actually, J.K. Rowling wrote a lot of her parts of her novels in Edinburgh, especially in a cafe at Victoria Street. So definitely going to be visiting all of Victoria Street, which they say is actually possibly an inspired location of Diagon Alley, what Diagon Alley is based off of. We'll be also riding the Jacobite train, it's basically the West Railway, I think is the actual name of it. Not super historical because it's a more modern, railway, but it takes you through a lot of the lands over in Argyll area. But some of the filming in the Harry Potter was of this particular train. So can't wait to ride that one. So we're going to be doing a little bit of like Harry Potter as well. And there's a whole bunch of tours you could do that are just Harry Potter themed in Edinburgh. I'm hoping to hit a couple of the cafes where J.K. Rowling, wrote some of her manuscript and some of the inspiration for parts of Harry Potter. There's a spot in the graveyard. I think you can look up and see one of the schools there that possibly was an inspiration for Hogwarts as well. So many things. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all of it. I'd love to climb Arthur's Seat. It's supposed to be possibly, it's like this big volcano mountain you can hike, but on the outskirts, possibly the location of the legendary King Arthur. There is also Sir Walter Scott Monument on the outskirts. There is Dean Village. A few other places that are kind of along the outskirts, so I don't know if I'm going to be getting to those, but I have them in mind. Definitely would like to walk just the Royal Mile, which is slightly over a mile, by the way. It is kind of a historical area where, you have the castle on one end and you have Holyrood Palace on another, which is, royal residences. And along the way, a few museums. And these are all things that are on my list to do in Edinburgh. But again, it's just going to depend on time. I hope that I can just take you for a full walking tour just of Edinburgh. I probably will have an entire video that's just Edinburgh alone, maybe even 2 videos, just depends. Maybe one on the castle and one of everything else. I don't know, that's kind of my thoughts. We're going to definitely be breaking, you know, this trip into a lot of pieces for you. So, okay, guys, so I'm going to end it there. We're going to leave it here. And because this is already so long, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you learned a lot. And I cannot wait to take you in person to some of these places and bring all of this history alive. Would love to hear it. Have you ever been to Scotland? Have you visited any of these places? Let me know. Make sure you stay tuned because we're almost there. We're going to be taking off. Look for my packing videos, and then I'll be bringing you along on the flight. And I'll see you there, guys. Pop that subscribe. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.